I have never moderated one of these things, and one of the reasons I don't moderate them is because to be a real good facilitator or moderator, you need to be good at fostering discussion and not know much about the topic. And with me, that's a little bit of a problem because my job is lagoons, and a lot of times I'm more prone to cut off discussion than I am to promote it because I want it my way. So I'm going to have to change modes a little bit today. I hope you all came prepared to jump into the discussion. I can't say that there's 100% right or wrong answers on all of this stuff. A lot of times it's what works on your farm or what works in your area and what you can get to work best for you, or what the state tells you works best for you. But as part of this discussion, because I didn't want to run the whole thing, and Bob mentioned he's worked with me a lot, and I've got several other Cargill contract farms in here that have worked with me quite a bit, and they'll probably tell you that, yeah, Jerry doesn't maybe know exactly how it goes on my farm or whatever. So I'm hoping everybody's going to engage in this, and we're all going to learn something today. But because I didn't want to be the one running the whole discussion or giving a flat presentation, I did enlist 3 panel members to help me with this today. First off, Jeff Browning. Jeff, you wait for folks here. Jeff has designed a lot of CAFOs, a lot of manure handling systems around the state. He also does nutrient management plans. He's been involved well over 20 years, Jeff, is that right? From his office in Bowling Green. Jeff's also a farmer, so not only does he know it in theory, he also knows these things in practice. He's the kind of guy that deals with these things on a daily basis like the rest of you. He's owns a couple of hog farms, which he's got on contract, and then also, you still have a dairy?
I do.
Still has a dairy farm? Okay, then also David Stevens, and he's a farm member on our panel, works for United Hog Systems at Marshall. David, how many lagoons do you manage?
I don't count that many.
Okay.
A dozen or so.
Okay, and I've worked with David since I started with Cargill. I will tell you, I have learned a lot from working with him. When I worked with DNR, I was reasonably knowledgeable about smaller systems, but David's helped me move that knowledge to a much higher level, working with a variety of systems and a variety of situations. And then Michael Heaton. Okay, Michael Heaton is, I'm really tickled to have him on the panel today because he's sitting in the chair that I used to sit in. He's a regulator, still employed by Department of Natural Resources. He may have inspected some of your farms, he may supervise some of the people that inspect some of your farms. He has been involved, with DNR for several years, been about the last 4 years, I think, been in the CAFO office.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael is the guy that he's the go-to guy when you've got questions about regulations, unless you're with Cargill, and then I'm your first call on that kind of stuff. But Michael is very knowledgeable on the CAFO regulations. He's very knowledgeable on practical applications of these things out on the farm. Really wanted folks to be able to get familiar with him. One of the things I remember from working at DNR, it is pretty easy to blame an agency because it's this big faceless monolith down in Jefferson City with all those foreigners working in it. But I'll tell you, DNR, because I've worked there, I know for a fact it's an agency made up of people. Those people each have personalities. Those people are out there trying to do the right thing every day, and it helps a lot to put a face on the agency and get to meet people. And then it's not the big faceless agency that you think's just there to beat up on you. And then, of course, last of all, as Bob mentioned, I've worked for Cargill for about 8.5 years. I worked with DNR 14 years before that. Done a lot of stuff around the state. I started out as an ag teacher. Well, actually started out as a kid feeding calves on a dairy farm when I was about 4, but been involved in some form of agriculture most of my life, including spent a little time in hazardous waste work and working with drinking water and wastewater systems in municipalities. So we've got a lot of differences a lot of different experiences on the panel here today, but as I said, I really hope you all will get involved in the discussion because not only are you all going to learn from each other, but I think we usually can take away some knowledge from discussions like this. So with that, I'll tell you kind of the format for this. I've got some questions that I'm going to put up here just to kind of challenge our panel and have them comment, or people in the audience feel free to comment. But before I do that, I'd just like to ask, has anybody got just a real burning question about their lagoon, their waste management system that they'd like to ask before we get started? Okay, first big question. We need to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, what is a lagoon? And with that, I'm going to start off. Jeff, would you want to answer that one? What's your definition of a lagoon? You design them, so where would you go with that?
Lagoon is a biological treatment and storage system. You have the biological treatment part is by volume in an anaerobic system, which I'm sure almost all the systems that you guys have here is an anaerobic system. So you have a by volume treatment part of the lagoon. Then you have storage, which includes your manure, your processed water, and your storm water. So in a, I guess, nutshell, simple definition, that's what it is.
Michael, how's the state have any difference in that, or anything you'd add?
No, not really. I mean, it's just an earthen basin. Like, again, it's a storage unit and then has biological treatment in it. A lot of lagoons are designed for the sludge or the solids to settle out to the bottom, and those have to be dealt with, at a later time.
And then for the states, for permitting purposes?
For permitting purposes on lagoons, the way CAFOs now work, if you have a deep pit, the operating permit's the only thing you need. But if you have a lagoon that is an earthen structure, then you also need a construction permit and an operating permit. And the construction permit needs to be obtained prior to the construction of those. As far as regulations go, if you disturb, that means you take out the root zone of an acre or more of ground, then you also need what they call a land disturbance permit.
Have you all issued any lagoon permits? When was the last lagoon permit?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I see a lot of the permits come through. In our region, I have not seen a lagoon permit come through in probably like the last 8 years. So they're kind of, older technology.
Okay. David, anything you want to add?
I don't know if I've got anything on that. I mean, just storage area that needs to be watched over so we don't have issues with it, but it can be managed good.
There's a slide in here that I put in a different spot. I know we're going to want to look at it with what they're talking about, so I'm going to find it. Okay. I should have had this one up while you were talking, Jeff. Jeff was talking about treatment volume in the lagoon, then about storage volume, about the earthen berm. That's basically a cross section of a lagoon. It's kind of what your lagoon would look like if you were to put a piece of plexiglass out there, cut half of it off, and shove the dam away. That's kind of what you would see. And we'll come back to that one a little bit later because there's some finer points of that I think we're going to want to discuss. Michael, question on the board. I'm going to let you jump on that one first. Is anybody in here still carrying a CAFO permit? Got 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 or 6 of you. Okay. Well, I'm going to let Michael talk on that one. I think, is everybody aware it's 1,000 animal units, which is 2,500 finishers or 10,000 nursery pigs required you to have a permit. I think we still have voluntary permits. But Michael, what about the farms that are under the CAFO size?
Okay. Looks like that question is written for me, so I am the correct person on that. But I don't have enough hogs to need a CAFO permit, so DNR can't touch me, right? That is an incorrect statement there. We have, if you ever look at our laws and regulations, it's books and books and books. I'm just going to pull out a couple of these that is relevant to this question. We have 2 regulations. I won't get into the citation numbers. We have one called a putting and placing, which pertains to all. If you have a contaminant, a potential water contaminant, and you have it in a location where it's reasonably certain to get into waters of the state, then that would be a violation if you have that. And that could be a composter, a lagoon. So if it's in an area where it's reasonably certain to cause pollution, then that would be a violation. We also have one that's nobody in the state of Missouri can violate what we call water quality standards. So if you actually have swine effluent or another contaminant get into waters of the state, then that's a violation. Water quality standards, that could be exceeding what we call the ammonia limits. The limits for the ammonia that's in the hog waste in there, or it could be just changing the condition of the water. As you're changing the color, your odor, you're making it unfit for aquatic life to be living in. So those two regulations pertain to everybody in the state. We also have one that if you are a Class 2 facility and you have issues, multiple issues, we can require people, even though they're not by regulation, they're under the size, we can require them to obtain a permit through that.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, I know if somebody's got a CAFO permit, they're supposed to be inspected once during the during the permit cycle.
Right.
But on one of these operations, it's not regulated, and I think we understand now there are instances where they could pull an inspection. What would trigger an inspection? I mean, how would DNR find out that operation was there and possibly end up doing an inspection?
Okay. Good question. If you're a Class 1 facility, that means you have 1,000 animal units to 2,500 head or more. You're in the system to get an inspection. We try to do 20% per year, so that'd be once every 5 years or once per permit cycle. It's kind of a hit and miss, but that's our goal. If you're a Class 2 facility below that 1,000 animal units and you don't have a permit, the only time you will get an inspection if you have a citizen concern, somebody calls in and saying there's some issues there, then that will prompt us to come out and investigate and to do an inspection or an oversight look at your facility.
Okay. Jeff, just real quick, if you'd add something in, have you ever been called in to work with somebody on an after-the-fact situation where they've had a DNR issue and they've called you for assistance on working with those?
Yes, I have a few times. And actually, Michael's been on some of them. I think that the critical thing in that situation is to be proactive. If you have a situation that you have to tend to is to get on it immediately, and stop the spill, clean the spill up, things like that, and you'll find that Michael here is pretty forgiving and will work with you very well.
Thank you. Okay, what is, and there's got to be a producer that's got an answer on this one, I may have to start picking on some Cargill producers, but what's the hardest thing about managing a lagoon system? Okay. Anybody out there want to take a stab at that one? Bob, what is it? Rainwater. Good answer. David, what do you got to add?
Yeah, I think weather conditions, and you get a normal year, the rainwater is going to evaporate typically as much as it's going to come in. But you get wet years like we had earlier on, 3 years ago, that become a real problem. I'd pump out 12 inches out of Lagoon, and it would rain 6 inches back in that night. I didn't gain very far. It was a trying time at that point. So weather is probably the biggest issue. Make sure you get them pumped down on a timely basis when you can. Don't pass up a time to pump if you got anything in there to pump, if you can get it out. Manage it.
Michael, what do you guys deal with most often?
It'd be the rain issues. When we have those, Missouri, we don't have typical years normally. So, it's either raining a lot or we don't have rain. But when it rains a lot, it's hard to keep up with that increased amount. We may talk about a little bit later, something we done on our regulations we used to have on lagoons that you keep between that one upper operating level and lower operating level. And that was decided on a calculation, what was your days of storage, your 365 days of storage. So that might be you had an operating level between 1 foot and 3.7 feet, and that's the level you're supposed to stay in. We now have changed that so you can go from that 1 foot, your operating level now is that 1 foot level below your spillway to 2 feet to the bottom of your lagoon. So you may have, however tall your lagoon is or deep your lagoon is, you have that whole area you can pump down to. So on a good year, you can go down 7, 8 feet or however, your depth of your lagoon. You're not held in that small amount anymore.
Jeff? Both these guys said rainwater. One of our people in the audience said rainwater. Okay, from an engineer standpoint, what's the solution there?
I don't know if there's a solution. It's definitely rainwater. The solution is just management. That's really what it comes back to. You have to understand a lagoon. The treatment part of the lagoon is, I have found to be very forgiving. You can, ideally it would be loaded on a daily basis, and it works very well. Well, then we got into pull plug barns, and we load them now every week or 2 weeks, and we slug load them, and they still work great. They're very forgiving. The part that's not, of course, is the rainwater and the storage. Most lagoons are probably designed for about a year's worth of storage. Unfortunately, though, when that was designed, you consider things like rainfall and evaporation. Well, in Missouri, in most places in Missouri, rainfall and evaporation pretty much equal each other out. So you're in a situation a lot of times where you're only operating with maybe 3 foot of total storage depth. So you have to really be careful when and manage the thing to where if you're coming into spring, you don't want to be plumb full, which means you really need to pump some in the fall. Even though you have a year's worth of storage, maybe it's not a good idea just to pump once a year. You're probably better off pumping some in the spring, some in the fall. Think about your crop rotations. Maybe plant a little wheat or some kind of perennial. Have a little patch somewhere where you can go all the time if necessary, because we get some pretty wet weather sometimes in the late spring after crops are in even. So I think just thinking through your management issues and how to manage it is something you need to consider.
Real quick answer, if you could, please. Why don't we cover these lagoons and not worry about the rainfall?
Well, mainly cost. That's the big issue. But if you have an impermeable cover where you can keep the rainfall out, well, then you have gas issues that coming up and making that cover bubble up, and that becomes that's a management issue. It can be done. I know people who have looked at putting sunk pumps on the cover and different things like that, but all that's costly.
David, looking at that gauge up there on the screen, that's a lagoon gauge. That long crossbar is 1 foot below the spillway. The top crossbar is dead level with the spillway, and crossbars at 12-inch increments. David, if that was your lagoon, what would you be doing?
Well, if we was able to be pumping, I'd be pumping more water out of there. Keep it down. The better you can keep it down, then less likely. This last spring, there was no time to really pump this spring because it was so wet. If we hadn't got everything pumped last fall, we could have been in a world of hurt. And with the rain we had earlier in the year, the lagoons was filling up. I was starting to kind of wonder about them some then. Then we turned into a drought, and at that point, then everything went the other direction. But
I changed slides on you. If this was your lagoon, what would you be doing?
Well, I'd be sure wanting to find some place to go with it.
Okay.
And sometimes it's, it can be very challenging to do. The other thing is to watch on managing a lagoon is, do you have runoff water getting in there somewhere that you don't realize from rainfall? Typically, you get a 5-inch rain, that ought to only raise 5 inches. But if you're raising more than that, you've got water running in from somewhere else. You've got it's rained so hard it's made it over the berm in the wrong place. Maybe you need to do a little more drainage control around it. Over time, that this might develop. Maybe when it was built, it was perfectly good and it didn't happen. But you get a big rain, and a lot of times that's the time to go out and look too. If you got this big rain, get out there before the water quits flowing and see where it's flowing around, because you might find it is running in and you didn't realize it. So there's a couple other things there I think to managing that to help, because you got to keep that rainwater out.
Okay. David, I think you might be the only one. Well, no, there's some other Cargill guys in here. Can anybody tell me what these two things have in common? What? By Thanksgiving, have the lagoon pumped down to 40 inches. That's a rule of thumb we use in Cargill. If you're down by 40 inches at Thanksgiving, you will probably make it through the winter without having to pump again. But one of the things I kind of have trouble understanding is why guys like to pump effluent in January and February. I would not want to be pumping right now. And I can tell you, looking at Cargill's freeboard report for last month, we've got people that desperately need to pump right now. But they're on frozen ground, and it's really hard to keep equipment going right now. So Thanksgiving, if you're down 40 inches, you will make it through the winter 9 times out of 10. But we really encourage people to do that. Okay. Michael Heaton wanted to talk about this one. First off, my question up there, what is freeboard? Why is it important? And why can't you just fill up to the spillway and fill up the spillway and use that extra berm for storage space? But Michael and I had a discussion here at the start of the meeting. First off, what is freeboard? But what's the definition of freeboard?
Well, our department's definition of freeboard is just the area from the top of the berm to the bottom of the spillway. That's our definition of freeboard. Depends on who you talk to what is the definition of freeboard. Some people will say it's from the bottom of the spillway to the top of your water level. So you need to make sure you know who you're talking to and what the actual definition of freeboard is there. In most people's thoughts is the definition of freeboard is from the bottom of the spillway to the top of the water level. And I think that's what Cargill's definition or thought is on that. Why is it important? It's how many days of storage you have in that lagoon. You know, if you're at 2 inches of freeboard, you better be getting it out of there. If you got 40 inches at Thanksgiving, you're probably good until the spring on that.
Jeff, that second part of that question, you know, we've got that extra foot of dirt we had to pay to get put up there above that spillway. Why can't we just fill the spillway in and have a little more lagoon storage? What's wrong with that?
Well, ideally, your spillway has been located in a location around the lagoon that if there is a discharge, it's more of a controlled discharge. So that freeboard's going to protect in an extreme event when your lagoon's full and it's raining cats and dogs, and it's going to run over. What it's doing is it's protecting the berms from a catastrophic failure. You know, so you don't want to get in a situation where the water's running over a 20-foot fill slope and is eroding it away. That could become a serious disaster. And now instead of just releasing some storm water off the top through a controlled structure, ideally in a location that's maybe on the cut slope or, a little safer location, you could end up in a situation where the whole berm goes.
Okay. How often should somebody, any of you guys feel like jumping on this, but how often should you check that lagoon berm elevation against the spillway? In other words, can these lagoon berms settle over the years?
Yes, they can. They're typically compacted very well, and there's minimal settlement, but there can and usually is some settlement. So I've seen a lot of times the lagoons get full, and you're looking at pump down markers, and you look out there, and all of a sudden across on a fill slope somewhere, you're 6 inches from overflowing, and it's maybe a foot from the spillway. So the berm could be lower than the spillway, even though it wasn't constructed that way. It's settled at that point.
David, you were nodding a lot there at first. You have experience with that?
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. I mean, there'll be some settlement in older lagoons. Maybe they weren't even built very properly. And water levels down, you think you're in pretty good shape. Like Jeff says, it gets on up or close to that spillway. Now you decide you've got other spots. So, I mean, it's a good practice to take a transit and go around there. If you're not capable yourself, get somebody to come in and do it. I do it myself, go around them. I'll double check find the lowest spots around. Maybe we do have a spot we need to fill in a little bit around on the dam part of it. Make sure the spillways, it does have that 1 foot differential in it, and make sure that foot corresponds with where your marker stake is, because it could change some. Depending how good that marker's been put in there. Freezing and thawing has a tendency to work them over sometimes. So, yeah, it's pretty important to go back and look at that and help correct some of those problems. Or your spillway itself may have just, for whatever reasons, has gotten lower than it needs to be. You don't want to ever bring it up, like I said, above what it was expected to be. But if it happens to be 6 inches lower yet, why, you need to get that brought back up and seed that down to grass so that it'll stay there for you.
We've kind of alluded to this. I think all the panelists have, but how often are you supposed to pump a lagoon down? And a follow-up question to that. How often? We'll talk about solids in a minute. But how often are you supposed to pump that freeboard or pump the effluent out of the lagoon?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of statement about at least once a year, but we're also talking, try to get down in the fall to where you got reasonable, and then if you can pump again in the spring and you have in there, you better be pumping it out again. I don't know if there's any written rule when you got to, but there's no reason to be going into winter with pushing your elements on it.
Jeff, how many times a year can you pump?
As often as possible, right?
As often as possible.
And that would probably be my answer. If it makes sense for you to be pumping, pump. Lagoons are designed for storage periods that are all over the place. Some of them are only 90 days and all the way up to a year. And we have Missouri weather, so it changes from year to year all the time. There's no 2 years alike in a row. So I think it comes back to management. You really need to know your lagoon, how much storage you really do have, and you need to know what crop types you have going and what you can do, and get with it as often as possible.
Michael, along that line, can somebody pump a lagoon too much? In other words, at one event, or can they pump it too low?
No, by the regulation, as long as you keep at least 2 feet in the bottom of that lagoon, 2 feet of liquid, that's what our regulations say, so you can go down to that. You have to apply it on the land at the agronomic rates based upon your nutrient management plan or other plans on that. To go back to the level lagoon, the transits, and the spillway, I see a lot of people will use the spillway to back in their pumps because that's a lower level in elevation. Pumps, get less head pressure off of that. So your spillways do, get compacted a lot of times. So what we recommend is doing a yearly, like a springtime, check that spillway with your lagoon level marker, and to make sure it is accurate on that.
All right, thanks.
I'll make one quick comment on that.
Sure.
Michael comes at it from the regulatory perspective, and I'll come at it from the engineering perspective. I understand, and that's great that we can pump the lagoons down from a regulation perspective, but you got to know that if you do that, if you pump your treatment volume out, it's no longer a lagoon. It's a holding basin. So the concentration of nutrients in that thing, the next time you go pump it out, is going to be completely different. So, they are forgiving. I know people over pump lagoons. They pump into their treatment volume, and they get away with it quite a bit. I found lagoons to be a forgiving thing. I actually like lagoons, unlike some people. Just be aware, if you can over pump them, you can pump too far.
I told y'all this technology thing is going to kill me. I can't even get my batteries in the right direction here. Okay, at the bottom of that slide, if you'll look there, you kind of see what Jeff was alluding to there just a minute ago. The bottom of it, bottom of the volume, or the bottom of the drawing. It says volume of accumulated sludge for period between sludge removal events. And that was one thing I wanted to hit on a little bit. How often, how often does the average producer clean solids out of the lagoon? First off, how often do they do it? And second, how often should they do it?
Personally, in the case of how often does the average producer clean them, I'm sitting there looking at John Haney. He can probably tell you more about that than me. My experience is most of them never. And the ones that do are usually greater than 10 years or so. The lagoons I design have about 10 years worth of sludge volume in them. So, I've actually went out in a boat and surveyed sludge volumes a few times in different lagoons, and I've found them to kind of be all over the place. I've seen lagoons that are 6 or 8 years old that have 4 foot of sludge in them, and on the other hand, I've seen lagoons that's older than myself, I think, and they'll have maybe 6 or 8 inches in some cases. And I can't answer really why, except maybe they've been overloaded in the past. But like when you wouldn't have the proper amount of treatment volume for the animals' production that's going in there. So the volatile solids coming from the buildings, from the animal manure, is greater than what the total treatment volume in the lagoon can withstand to sustain the biological activity in the lagoon. That's why you need to be a little careful pumping into the treatment volume. And I think it's, personally, I like the idea that DNR is given on that and is letting people pump into it, because there's a lot of people that just have very small depths of storage and they need to pump into it to be safe. But you do need to be a little careful in there, getting into it.
Jumping out of my moderator thing here and into my environmental guy thing for just a minute. I've been out on some farms and seen where a producer with a recycle system pumps his lagoon down 1 foot and he runs out of recycle water. Can't pump anymore because he's got solids, got islands. I was on a lagoon several years ago in Florida where it was on an egg farm, and there were actually buzzards landing on the islands in the middle of the lagoon and congregating there waiting for eggs to float by. That's a pretty good sign. When you pump down 1 foot and you see something solid enough to hold a buzzard out in the middle of the lagoon, that's a pretty good sign you got a solids problem and you need to take care of it. David, we're going to get to you in a minute because I know I'm going to have you talking on solids. Just one comment here real quick, the slide I've got up there. This is on a system, Cargill system down in Arkansas, a contract feeder down in Arkansas. I built a system where he's actually trying to recover solids. Real low-tech system. He just built a concrete trench with a slope in it. He puts effluent when he just pulls the plugs on shallow pit pull plug. They go into that trench. They sit there a few days and decant. He pumps the water off of it and then just uses a skid steer loader to go in and scrape the solids out. Okay, this is off of one event of pulling a plug, and you see the volume of solids he's got in there. So you can, looking at this, you can see why our lagoons fill up with solids. If you've got this much going in every time you pull the plug, and your lagoon's got a defined treatment volume, eventually that thing's going to fill in with solids. And then we're looking at either, well, Michael, we get a lagoon full of solids. We haven't got recycled water anymore. What's the department require on lagoons? Once they're no longer usable, what's the guy's options?
Well, a guy's option is to dredge them. I mean, to take the solids out. We don't really have regulatory things on if you're 50% volume or of solids or in the bottom, you got to remove them. But we just look at, how are you maintaining? Are you keeping it safe from overflowing? So if you're getting to that area where you're not keeping it safe from overflowing, then we will have a discussion with you on that. One thing you got to remember if you do dredge out of lagoon, the phosphorus, you'll have high concentrations of phosphoruses in that sludge. So if you take that and put it on your field you normally land apply on, then your phosphorus might spike, and then you're kind of limited maybe on your application in the future on those fields for a few years.
We're running kind of short on time, so I'm going to move us along here real quick. This is probably one of the more important slides and discussions we'll have right here. We got a lagoon full of solids. You're here and here. You got to figure out what to do with those solids. You got choice. You can dredge it out. You can agitate and flush them out, or you might have to build another lagoon and do something with that one. Tremendous expense there with building another lagoon, or you decide to go out of business and you still have to close the lagoon. But kind of wanted David to talk a little bit in particular because he's had a lot of experience with cleaning solids out. David, you want to talk to us just a little about your system?
That's what it's called a boat. It floats out on your lagoon. It agitates by forcing liquid down into the lagoon through nozzles and stirring. And it does a tremendous job stirring. We started in 2010. We bought the first one that was sold in production model. It was sold out. And we've used it extensively since then. We was at the point, because we had been, like some was talked, never had done a lagoon as far as stirring. We didn't know how we was going to do it. We've seen prop deals, but that was kind of a losing battle. This machine come out is very economical to run, but it does a tremendous job of stirring the effluent in there. With them nozzles pointing down into the bottom and stirs that back up, the slower you go, the more it stirs. You can get into it's remote controlled. So you can run it around to where you need to. You can help push it back to your lead pump that's pumping out of there. It's just done a tremendous job. Economy-wise, we're burning maybe 4 gallon, 5 gallon of fuel an hour at the most running that machine out there. There's nothing else that I know of that you're going to run out there stirring that you're going to use that kind of low amount of fuel and do the job that it's doing.
Just whoever wants to jump in, how big of a lagoon can you agitate with traditional tractor-driven propeller agitators? I'm talking size-wise, acre-wise.
Yeah, I don't know.
David, you've got some lagoons that are up over 2 acres, don't you?
Yeah, we've got some that's 5 acre size. And that's the beauty with this machine. You can go any place you want, wherever you start seeing issues. The better guy, the guy that's really running the control up there and remoting that around, the better job, the more he watches and pays attention, the better job you can do in there. And he sees these spots coming out while he can go to them. They're also in the process of fixing up a solid meters for on this same piece of equipment that'll be able to tell when it's stirring what is the percentage of solids that's in that liquid, so you can tell how much you're getting it stirred up. Along with that, my lead pump would also have that same meter, so I know if I'm getting it to the field, and if I'm not getting what the boat says it's stirring, then that guy needs to do a little better job of pushing it to me. But like I say, the beauty of it is you can go to any spot on that lagoon, wherever the problem spots are, you can go work that spots up, stir it, keep moving it around. You're not limited to any one spot, and you're not just forcing it to another area.
And not everybody is going to have the capital investment to put in this boat. Because you're looking at $150 for the boat?
Well, that'd be the top end. It depends, and we've got the Mobile Star on that, which that adds a pretty good price on it, which Mobile Star lets me control it from the computer and my tractor. I can see what that's running. I can change the speeds and everything from my tractor to help regulate what my guy's doing back here at the bank. The other thing, if you say, well, you can't afford, the thing is this rig can also be used not only in the lagoon, you can put a hose on it, you can pump. If you've got deep pits you need to stir, there's nothing to keep you from using this same rig to stir your deep pits, shallow pits, flush out. If you got shallow pits you need to flush, you can utilize it some to help do that. You could in a lagoon, you could feasibly be using it to stir the lagoon and hook your hose on and just pump to the field with it even and alternate. So there is a lot of flexibility with it that doesn't limit it only to stirring the lagoon out there, or it doesn't just have to be floating out there to work. So you can justify it in a lot of other directions to help justify that. If you was going to have to go out and buy a prop rig for your lagoon, you're looking $50,000 or so in that, and then what are you going to burn? You're going to burn 15, 20 gallon of fuel an hour at least to run that, and you're not going to do much of a job because all it's going to do is push your solids to the other side.
So Who besides you has one of these boats in Missouri? All right, do you know of any custom operators, or Jeff or Michael, do you guys know of any custom operators with this kind of equipment?
I don't know them in Missouri. I do know they're making their 100th boat. I bought the first one in 2010, late fall, or got it for fall of 2010. They're making their 100th boat, and they will have it down at the North American Manure Expo in Springfield. They're planning on having it down there for display, and it's going to be red, white, and blue. So that's a lot of boats, I feel like, for new technology, something come out, that there's a lot of them clear across the country, up into Canada.
Do we have any custom operators in here, any custom manure pumpers? Okay, well, next time you talk to your custom manure pumper, tell him this is what you want him to bring next time he comes out to work for you. Okay, we are bumping up against our time here. You folks are free to stay if you like. We'll go through a couple of slides real quick. If you want to get on to the next session or a restroom break or go talk to vendors, whatever, feel free to get up. But I knew we were probably going to run just a little bit over time with this kind of thing. One thing I wanted to hear real quick, vegetation. Michael, is that lagoon in compliance?
No.
Okay. What about that one?
No.
Even less.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even less.
What's wrong? Why is vegetation a big concern on these lagoons?
Vegetation, I mean, the regulations say look more at the deep-rooted vegetation on the lagoons. If it's trees or things that put out roots, they can actually damage the lagoon berm. The lagoon berm integrity is there, diminished on that. Also, if you have vegetation this tall, it's kind of hard to see what the condition of your berms is. You might have a channel started through your berm and you can't see it because the vegetation height is so great. And when you have extra vegetation on the berm like that too, it could add to your rodent problem, which will increase your berm problems also.
Jeff, you want to comment real quick?
I would just say he's right. I think he covered it.
What my CAFO work when I was with the state, I had the occasion to go. I mentioned a lagoon in Florida where we saw some issues. I was talking with an inspector from South Carolina there. She in particular was really tough on vegetation on lagoons. She pointed out to us that at one time she was inspecting a lagoon in South Carolina. She stepped on a 3-foot-long log. The log moved, and it turned out to be an alligator that she didn't notice in the grass. Since then, she inspects lagoons only when they look about like this one. And I want to point out, this lagoon in particular is a Cargill producer who's in the room. He does a heck of a job. If your lagoon looks like this, and Sam, I've used this slide over and over, this is the way they're supposed to look. If your lagoon looks like this, you will never get hate mail from me. When I come out and see a lagoon like this, it makes me happy. I'm probably not looking at a lot of the other problems that are out there because I like this so much, and I'm in the car and gone before long. So a goal we can all aspire to is to have our lagoon looking this good.